Thank you very much, guys. Welcome. I also have joining me today Malcolm Ferguson, one of our distinguished technologists. It's my peer within HPE, and Lance Homer from Equinix. And we're trying to answer. We're going to try to answer just one simple question today: should we stay or should we go? So how do we go through this today? So long story short, let's go through the agenda, the trends. We're going to be talking about some of the FSI trends that's hitting the market. We're going to be talking about GreenLake with Equinix, what we're trying to do, how we're trying to solve it, why does it matter? Then we're also going to talk about how we can accelerate these outcomes. I'll show you a little bit of that, and then we're going to finish up. Malcolm here is going to talk about some real world examples. Just make it tangible. Just make it show you where the path to this actually is a true value that we can actually deliver on today. This is not marketecture. So that being said, as we get through this, let's just start out the conversation here today. What's happening in the ecosystem of should we stay, should we go? It's really not should we stay or should we go. It's around delivering the experience. It's hybrid world. In the hybrid world, looking at a way to actually deliver a particular experience with cloud. Consumption is one aspect of it, but it's really more about the Homer Simpson click and go. It's around how do we deploy solutions, deploy it and actually be able to bring it on into the ecosystem to deliver the outcome. How can we accelerate that outcome, whether it be private cloud, infrastructure as a service, maybe it's a SaaS platform that you're trying to bring about with an ERP. We do all that. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And of course, you got the actual remote office. Look at workplace transformation is taking place right now with of course COVID's happening. I hope everybody out there is doing well. I know I've been having a bout with this stuff. So if you look at what we're doing in the workplace to facilitate a remote work connectivity around security and all the other aspects of maybe it's a trader workstation, maybe it's a power user, maybe it's just VDI and its various implementations, shared storage, and how do we actually scale up, scale out, and how do we become an agile ecosystem? We're going to talk about that here in a minute. And fintechs. If you look at fintech and what we're actually able to do there, it's around how do we accelerate that mobile app experience, and how do we get the frictionless customer journey? Then of course the data analytics, massive data sets. The data sets down here, some people just can't imagine when I talk to them about hundreds of petabytes. You guys out there, you have it. You understand the data that you have in your four walls. The question becomes, where do you put it? How do you access it? And then how do you actually deliver outcomes from it? Then of course the artificial intelligence over here. So if you have the data feeds the inference engines, right? But to create an inference engine, we have to have an AI or deep learning methodologies around how do we actually create this ecosystems to facilitate that. Now, AI, machine learning, and these type of ecosystems require massive compute, which also goes into what we're doing in our regulatory commitments with not just regulatory actual financial and all that good stuff, but also around our commitments to sustaining platforms. Maybe it's a low carbon footprint. So it's what we're trying to do not only in the ecosystem of low carbon, but also being able to actually derive value. But you know what, Lance, if I could ask you right quick, Equinix, think about what you guys do there. What am I missing from this conversation?
Well, thanks, Chris, and good to be on here with you today. And also thank you to all those who are attending and listening to this session, both live right now or recorded later on. So we're certainly seeing these 6 trends across the financial services ecosystem at Equinix also. My role there is in business development, covering the payments and banking ecosystem, which most of our participants are in those categories. And what we're seeing is kind of 3 big tranches of deployments of why people are deploying in Equinix. One is around the core, modernizing their core banking infrastructure, moving to SaaS-based models and maybe adjacent to cloud, which covers a couple of those check boxes here. Moving to the edge to be next to their partners in locations where their employees work, or they may have branches, and that involves deploying SD-WANs and making sure that they're secure and their access is reliable, et cetera. And then, lastly is ecosystem participation, where the model is really changing in the financial services industry from being kind of a monolithic stack where you get one vendor to do the majority of your core banking deployments and everything that attaches to it, to now being able to needing to connect to a variety of partners that create a digital supply chain that often is very different functioning than how you previously operate. So I'm really glad to be on here at HPE because, together we can help bring a solution together for the banks that makes sense for them.
No, Lance, I appreciate that feedback there. And as I get into more things what we're doing in the practical aspects with Malcolm and team, if you look at cybersecurity, one of our customers in the financial industry, we're looking at ecosystems of 100 plus terabyte a day ingest of security telemetry for SIM. We're looking at what we're doing in financial payments for fraud detection, for AI, and what we're able to do with C3 and others, which I'll get into in a little bit. But if you think about this, they all have a couple things in common. One is the how flexible can we be? How agile can we be? How do we mitigate risk to supply chain and delivering of the outcomes? So we wrap all this stuff into GreenLake, but I'm going to get a little bit more into GreenLake in a little bit. But thank you for that. These are 6 trends that are happening right now, guys. And again, if you have questions, I encourage you to throw it out there in our chat room. I see some chats, and I see a question out there. I'll get to that here in a moment. On the next slide, edge cloud data. It's simple, guys. It's edge centric, it's cloud enabled, and it's data driven. Edge centric. It's where we're seeing a plethora, not we, the industry, right? If I look at the industry, look at all the trade rags and all the stuff we're talking about there. Looking at edge centric, there's billions, 7 billion of people, of the technology, of places. Then to look at the 50 plus billion actual devices that are actually doing the actual connectivity into, maybe it's whether it be actual communication from peer to peer, whether it be financial banking, whatever it might be. That's a huge ecosystem, and it's driving massive loads of data. Of course, again, that cloud enabled experience over here in the far right. We want to be able to enable the business to be able to do the Homer Simpson ecosystem I just talked about. Make it simpler to simply click a button to deploy, click a button to actually understand, maybe look at SLAs, KPIs, and be able to understand that the actual utilization of the assets to actually drive the business outcome. And of course, that requires data analytics, data for the telemetry, data for the actual assets that are actually the family jewels, the entire ecosystem of the bank's data assets and what you're driving data out of it. I think McKinsey states right now that 80% of the data is not tapped in the banking and large trading ecosystems today. So this understanding of how HPE, Equinix, and team are trying to deliver that, and really it's around being able to make it where we can actually facilitate that ecosystem in a cloud experience, whether it be on premise in our colo with Equinix or in the public cloud. But if it's in the public cloud, making it where we can actually provide you an estate that actually has the telemetry of that public cloud. So we're going to get in that. But Lance, what am I leaving out here?
Yeah, I mean, just I'll tell you kind of the trends that we're seeing. Historically, the financial services industry has operated their own data centers that have been very costly to operate, and they want to maximize that investment. So they try to put all their workloads in 1 or 2 data centers and bring everything back to those locations. But what we're seeing here as they move to more of a hybrid cloud model, the should I stay or should I go is, where should you do this at? And you may historically have positioned your data centers where your staff is, but now you need to think about where are my partners, where's my ecosystem, where are the cloud providers, and it may not be in your best interest to just do 2 data centers in 2 locations that are adjacent to you. Maybe you want an east-west coast or a north-south position in the US or globally in a bunch of different markets. You're not moving data all across the world. They have the cost, both in times of moving that data and the latency that is incurred by that. And so we're seeing this more edge distributed infrastructure, which in this world that requires sometimes having partners like HPE who can help deliver GreenLake in all the locations where Equinix operates. So to support your development of the core business products that you're doing versus trying to run a data center. And then really, the spot about being data driven is spot on. If you look at all the trends in the industry right now, the margins, net margin interest in banks is a difficult thing to compete on. And really the value is that customer experience. That customer experience is primarily going to be differentiated on how the bank or payment company or fintech can take what data they're ingesting and make it a better experience. And then your last piece of cloud enable. Look, this is a hybrid multi-cloud world, and you really need to understand how are you going to design and embrace your infrastructure to take advantage of that.
Lance, I appreciate that feedback there. And I got my colleague here, Malcolm. We talk a lot about, the edge-centric aspect of this ecosystem, right? And edge-centric also requires us to have this cloud enablement piece. When I talk about the Homer Simpson button I just mentioned, you got to keep in mind what even I do for a living as a distinguished technologist. That just means I'm very technical. So I have to understand the plumbing behind this. And Malcolm and myself talk about this a lot. And one of the key challenges with cloud enablement is around governance. No, Malcolm, I didn't know if you wanted to throw a few words out there on the actual governance and what we're able to do with GreenLake Central in enabling this.
Well, thanks, Chris, for the introduction. One of the use cases I always like to share is our own company's ERP platform and private and hybrid cloud platform. So the picture you see behind me, I took actually of one of our colo cages here in Texas. And we got out of the data center business. We used to own our own data centers, and they were very expensive. And we moved into co-location because it was better facilities, better power, uptime, better network adjacency connectivity, cloud connectivity, and we can control our governance of our environment because it's a private, dedicated environment. So we have all the network taps we need for troubleshooting performance issues, for security access to the environment, which is a key part of governance. So it's been a huge help for our company to consolidate legacy environments into net new environments, which are lower cost, high speed, low latency connectivity. And that's the beauty Equinix brings is Equinix owns all the POPs in the US, right? There's not any better network connectivity or cloud connectivity than being tapped into a POP. So, then a lot of the actual cloud or as a service players are already in these facilities. So you're going to get lower cost connectivity. And so I just think that in order to achieve data governance, it's about having the control of your environment, the release cycle. For example, we're running SAP, so we get to control what version of SAP we move to. We're not part of a shared environment to where we have no governance and control, and they may move too fast to a version we're not ready for, and it's going to break things. So that's what we like, and that's why we offer it also as a service.
You know what? I appreciate that feedback there, Malcolm. That hit the nail on the head here, because at the end of the day, guys, our corporate strategy is to deliver everything as a service. That is to facilitate that we actually work with key partners like Equinix, put it all on a single PO, a single cost telemetry to understand how you actually consume it, and you can be agile and flexible in the entire estate. So again, it's aligning to our corporate strategy to deliver it as a service. Now, let's make this a little bit more tangible. It goes back to, look at these 4 pillars here we talk about, four lines and 4 veins around capacity, backlog, complex operations, but capacity constraints are self-evident. Now, capacity could be network, which is at the bottom down here, network limitations. Maybe it's east-west traffic from a POTS line, which Malcolm just alluded to. If you think about what we're doing in public cloud, enabling actual workloads that are running in hyper cloud, maybe you're running a grid, but the grid needs access to data, and that data needs to be funneled in. How do you get it there? How do you move it? And how do you actually get, not be consumed by egress and ingress charges? Now, if you look at capacity constraints for us, it's driving actually a enablement of a private cloud estate so that you can actually spin up various components, compute, storage, networking, right? And then a backlog of demand. It's simple. You've got a challenge. You've got a, maybe you've got a business strategy. You've got a business outcome you're seeking. How can HPE be relevant to accelerate the outcomes? That's simple. We want to be relevant, and for us to be relevant and to deliver it as a service, we want to be able to help you accelerate that outcome, whatever that is. Backlog of demand is just one simple use case here. So understanding, maybe it's SIM, security incident event management, maybe it's HPC grid, maybe it's AI, ML. These are key things that people are looking at, how to understand how to do some of these workloads, and maybe induce a private cloud, but it requires a substantial investment, and we want to mitigate that investment and mitigate the friction to delivering the outcome. And operations, if you think about what we're doing with the containerization of workloads, it's not for the faint of heart. The stuff is not simple. Though, if you look at some of the marketing literature out there, they make it sound like it's real easy. And I guess it's easy for people like myself and Malcolm and others that are technically live in this space. But we want to make sure that risk of change is no longer a function of understanding how you actually have to conduct business. We want to make sure that it's a white glove experience. We can actually show you that we can deliver the outcome working with Equinix to be able to spin up a container workload that actually leverages a hybrid cloud environment where I can actually move the workload from an on-premise to a private colo to a hyperscaler, and show you why, when, and what the levers are, and what the levers and buttons are to actually facilitate that outcome. And Lance, comments on the four pillars here.
Yeah, just a few here, and thanks, Chris, for leading the discussion. So, we're certainly seeing sustainability as a driver in the financial services industry, with CIOs and CTOs trying to figure out how do they deliver on what they're promising to both their investors and their customers about making sure that they are more green. And along those lines, what we're seeing is them wanting to dense up their compute, and leverage grid computing. And one of the challenges they're facing is they, with grid computing, is that they don't have enough data center capacity to fit it in, or they do have the data center capacity, and now they're paying for certain, a carbon footprint that they're not fully utilizing. And so we're certainly seeing kind of this move to co-location as a solution for high density grid compute inside of Equinix. And then, I think just touching on kind of the speed to market and delivery. Look, it's a very fast-paced world, much faster paced than it was 5 or 6 years ago, with having to deliver applications, deliver connectivity. When it comes to, we turn up a new partner, historically you'd order a line from like one of the carriers, like a Verizon, AT&T, et cetera, and you're willing to wait six weeks to a few months to get that connectivity in place. That doesn't make it in today's world. And so being able to turn up connectivity to your partners to test new applications, and then being able to turn it up and turn down the computer network capabilities, are all important to all these things that, meeting today's needs. And then when it comes to network limitations, look, I know a lot of people will want to say, why can't we just do this in our own data center? If you look at kind of who the network providers are in your data center, and think about the amount of data that you're needing to pass in your digital supply chain back and forth to partners and consumers of your data, can they really handle that? Or can you get capacity on demand from hundreds of different network providers that may sit in a co-location provider like Equinix? And these are key things that you should be thinking about going forward. Of like, when they could answer the question, should I stay or should I go? Again, where do you go? Who do you go with? And why are you going there? All things that should be considered.
Lance, that's so funny you've mentioned that, because this network limitation that you allude to here, it's a big one, right? If you think about what we're doing, guys, under HPE GreenLake, again, pushing to as a service, everything as a service, we're able to instantiate an entire experience in a colo, Equinix, a key partner here, to facilitate this, give you a cloud experience. And at a click of a button, you can add east-west traffic, of course, that's in band, but you can also end to north-south. You can actually go outside the ecosystem. The PaaS line that Malcolm just talked about, being able to facilitate that kind of control to facilitate a business demand. We want to be able to be agile and flexible, but we also want to be able to instantiate an ecosystem that you only pay for what you use. So again, going back to that as a service experience, we want to be able to instantiate in the state on premise, that colo or your cloud, but that enables us to be able to spin up a workload fast. A simple change order looking at the buffer capacity, whether or not we actually need to add physical hardware on site. When I say on site, talking about colo here, could be anywhere. So that's an interesting play here. So I want to give you the lay of the land. And if I give you the lay of the land, you need to understand that GreenLake and HPE GreenLake, maybe I'm too technical, but some of the marketing branding stuff can get confusing. And I want to make sure that if I do anything, accomplish anything today, is show you where we're relevant, and more importantly, show you, remove some of the confusion. There was a question about control of a contingent workforce. Talking about contingent workers, the question out there in the question room is specific controls around contingent workers. The answer is yes, and how that is actually done is through our managed services practice and how we actually facilitate that. So long story short, GreenLake has essentially 4 pillars. And if you think about the 4 pillars, the very first one right here is consumption. It's simple as that. It's you only pay for what you use. But that's table stakes. We needed to do that. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, but we as a company have to be able to deliver the infrastructure each state, the software, the licenses, the license to use, the actual support experience, all has to be able to be delivered as a service. So check the box down here on consumption analytics. Pay for what you use. Simple. Next, it's around the technology services. How do we de-risk the environment? How do we understand labor costs? How do we actually facilitate the technology services enablement? People. Remember, earlier we talked about the actual everything's a service and technology, not good stuff. But what I failed to mention is around the technology, the people, the process, the culture. We have to address all of it. Remember, I talked about Kubernetes. That's new technology. New technology requires people to have training and technical expertise. Doesn't mean that you're going to outsource all of it. Just means that we can do staff augmentation. We can run sidecar with you guys. Sidecar being a Kubernetes pun there, but a point. Facilitating how we can accelerate your business outcome. We do not want to be an obstacle. We want to be an enabler. All right. And if you look at the cloud experience, there's the controls we talk about, the GreenLake Central. What Malcolm mentioned earlier around our cloud controls is facilitating a governance of cloud, on-premise, public, private. Running Equinix, how do you actually maintain all of it? So there's the governance compliance, and in the compliance goes to the question about the person about contingent workers. How do we facilitate the individual gaining access and RBAC controls? And then lastly, where do you put it? Right? Again, we talked about on-premise, but if you're on-premise in your colo, the chance, or in your data center may have constraints around, go back to the AI ML workload I mentioned, maybe private cloud, the scale. Think about power. Think about cooling. In today's world, the CPUs are getting denser, CPUs are getting faster, more powerful. Amount of RAM. I mean, years ago, you couldn't even fathom 4 petabytes in a fault domain, but now we're running 2, 3, 4,000 VMs, somewhere in your neighborhood of 4,000 cores, 4 petabytes. That's a pod fault domain, and we have customers that have 30, 40 pods, and some of you guys out there are way bigger than that. So again, it's looking at a fault domain and looking at understanding of scope and scale. How do we actually facilitate that? So we go to our colos, and our colos actually have the ability to do other things. Meaning, right now I can actually look at Equinix for a functionality of HPC, which I'm going to get into in a minute. They're on HPC around power and cooling. Some of you guys out there have made strategies with your corporation to achieve a low carbon footprint by 2025, or maybe you're doing sustainability engineering by 2030 and delivering business outcomes. The CEOs have put an edict on the market saying that we're going to have net neutral carbon zero footprints by 2025, 2030. You guys know who you are. We're actually working with you. We have DLC, direct liquid cool systems, to actually do the private cloud. We use partners like Equinix that are already plumbed for this functionality. We've been doing it for years in our HPC and the DARPA and the DoD government ecosystems that have $100,000 node clusters. We know what we're doing. Now we're bringing it to the enterprise, and you're leveraging key partners like Equinix. Lance, what do you thought? What's your thoughts on these topics here?
I just want to say that my experience of working with GreenLake, all these pillars are, very valuable. And I hope everyone in the audience understands kind of the value that GreenLake is bringing to the end users in this, and kind of where Equinix fits in it. The thing that comes to my mind as you've been talking about this, and when I often talk to customers that are looking at kind of best of practices inside of Equinix, what we've seen with other companies do inside the financial services industry, or even outside the financial services industry, often say you really need to begin with the end in mind, of figuring out what it is that you really want to accomplish. And oftentimes we get really so initially focused in on, we've been given an assignment by the business to launch this product, and you begin kind of just down the road, like, okay, so we're gonna need this many servers, we're gonna need this network, but really, if you're being at the end of mind, you'd say, well, I really want to position this application in an environment that can have the flexibility and have all the end user experience for cloud, and have the economics that come with an as a service model. And when you start to do those things, you start kind of backing into, what do I really want? What are the values of my business? And I think that's where kind of the HPE Equinix relationship will make a lot more sense if you understand things beyond just the narrow mind of, how do I just get this latest task off my desk and up and running, to how do I really want to run this, and how will it most be agile and beneficial for the future.
So true, Lance. So true. And I'm seeing another question out in the question room. Tanweer asked a great question around 2021. 6 countries have net zero emission policies. Microsoft's bold commitment to be carbon negative by 2030, and thus, how realistic is this? And first off, it's very realistic. But again, it has to deal with how do we accelerate the outcomes? So it's not just there's not one thing that's going to solve this problem, right? So, but there are a comprehensive aspect of various things that actually do facilitate the outcome. And it does vary, right? So it does require, understanding of, consolidation. It understands, how we're enabling, data center optimization for thinking about what we're doing with power and heating and cooling and that good stuff. So I encourage you, please reach out to HPE and Equinix on these topics, and we will deep dive on it. We'll cover a little bit more about what we do in HPC.
I know that one of my colleagues will be typing in response a little bit about, Equinix position about green roofs and things of that nature. But look, we take our role in connecting the world and helping, protect mission critical assets very seriously, and we are certainly driven towards, zero emission footprints and using green energy here at Equinix. And that's what's driving, companies into Equinix because of our commitment to deliver that. So glad to be partnering up with GreenLake for that.
Yeah, again, for the audience out there, how do we stay relevant in this world? To do that, we have to be able to align to these initiatives. And we've been doing it for a long time. We've just been doing it at the biggest of the biggest scales. Again, I mentioned the government. Look at CERN. Look at national weather. What we do with these guys in massive ecosystems. So just take that and be able to put it into an enterprise quality delivered data center, and then wrap it as a service. So you don't have to worry about the complexity. Just worry about how we're able to deliver the outcome, and then more importantly, be able to report that so that you can actually facilitate output to the market. So if you think about this, I wanted to bring down some use cases, and these, whether it be IT operations, we talked about over here, we've already alluded to it, being able to facilitate simplistic operations of a modern estate, whether that be a containerized estate, bare metal, whether it be maybe a massive scale analytics. So if you're doing, I mentioned, we just do some, there's some names over here on the right-hand side. These are ISVs that actually facilitate this outcome. And if I'm thinking about like what we do with Applica and NPL, this is natural language processing, NLP, and what we're doing with if you think about everything like data robot, maybe we're doing sentiment analysis, understanding out what are the actual documents that we're interpreting, then looking at a workflow. How do we actually facilitate the workflow being on premise? Maybe we're using a hyperscaler for particular aspects of that, the ERP aspects of it, then bringing it back in. Maybe it's a warehousing aspect and bringing it back in, but doesn't really matter. It's understanding that we actually take a look at the business problem, the desired outcome, and how do we actually facilitate the simplistic nature of the workflow's integration with the actual outcome. And maybe it does require us to do a colo instantiation of a grid. Maybe it's a private cloud. Any one of these, risk mitigation, security, business operations, compliance, all of these matter. Whether you're doing a massive scale data analytics for SIM, or whether you're doing, maybe a quant analytics or a branch enablement, we are looking at ways to enable those outcomes. Lance, any topics here that I'm leaving out?
Lance, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries.
Look, these are certainly the use cases that we're seeing deployed inside of Equinix that the financial services industry is worried about. What I'd suggest is, if you're on this call, you're on this call for a reason, because you probably have some of these boxes that you're focused in on.
Yeah.
What I'd recommend is setting up a meeting with our two companies, sitting down with a solutions architect who has experience working on these projects with companies like yourself, who can help guide you through this process. These are all things that we're certainly seeing deployed inside of Equinix. And I think there was a question in the chat about, let me just pull it up here. It was just something that, how does this, it's all about as a service, how does, and driving down costs and things like that, how do we compare here? And I think that's a fair question here. And I think, Malcolm, you'll cover a lot of that in the use cases, but just to kind of touch on it now before we get to that point, it's like we specialize in being a co-location provider who can connect you to multiple clouds and multiple service providers and make it so that you're in this neutral facility where we focus on what we do and can bring in partners like HPE who have this level playing field to deliver best of class services for what they do. What you'll find is that value is very hard to replicate elsewhere. Yes, people can charge you less, but you're not getting the same kind of platform of being able to connect to partners and latency to the clouds and the ability to turn up network connectivity, on a per day basis and things of that nature. So, there's substantial differentiation in the marketplace between what Equinix does and our competitors do, as well as what HPE does and their competitors. I don't know if you guys want to cover that a little bit more before we get into Malcolm's piece, but
Lance, you're bringing up a good question here. That question around cost, guys. Scope and scale matter. It's that simple. I mean, if you just need one laptop, no big deal, right? Thumb drive it, be done with this conversation. But if you look at, when I mentioned earlier about the fault domains of 2, 3, 4,000 VMs in a 4 petabyte fault domain, and you have 20, 30, 40 of these fault domains, that's when we actually start looking at how can we simplify the IT operations? How can we simplify security in that estate? And then how do we actually create a geographic disbursement of risk? How do we actually facilitate the business outcome of cost optimized delivery of flexible and agile state, whether that be a private cloud, whether it be analytics or ERP systems that we're going to be talking about. So the answer is substantial savings. There are some public references out there that we can mention, but I did not have them in here today because there are various ones that I'm restricted about talking about, and I don't know them all. But in the banking world, there's a lot. And you'll see that out on our Google website. You'll Google HPE and our financial, and you'll see what I'm talking about there. And we're going to mention 2 of them here in a few minutes anyway. So, the private cloud. Think about with private cloud, the governance, the compliance I mentioned a moment ago around the cloud portal, right? So you would actually have a GreenLake Central. This is the actual management plane. There's a visual of this GreenLake Central in a minute. This is where GreenLake Central actually is your compliance engine of your private cloud. And in that estate, what are we running in this private cloud? That GreenLake cloud could be, like I mentioned, VDI, Trader Desktop. Maybe it's running a time series database ecosystem where you're running KDB, KX that is, or you're running, various, aspects of HPC or ML, machine learning using a unified data ops. We have a customer right now that's running S3 as a service, 160 petabytes. We have, a unified data platform customer that's running HDFS, S3, NFS, and parallel POSIX in a single namespace that's over 200 petabytes. So again, that's the actual going into a compute. And the question is, where is all that data? The data is on premise and in our colo. We're actually replicating and maintaining where the data is, not to mention there's a part of the workflow that actually facilitates the data into a hyperscaler. There's a portion of the job that they run, an HPC job in a particular hyperscaler, and then they bring it back. They actually just take the output. So we actually conceive the data, run the job, and take the output back to on-premise. There are many ways of looking at this. The question becomes, how can we facilitate the outcome and simplify the economics? It's not that we're saying that you cannot be use hyperscaler. That's not it. It's understanding it's a hybrid world. How do we derive value, and how do we actually simplify the use cases and identify where that workload should run? Where in a colo should we run? How do we have the compute close to the data? So that's what we're talking about in this slide here. And if you think about that, our partner with Equinix solves a substantial problem with this, the connectivity to the hyperscaler. Lance, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I want to make sure we have time to kind of get to the use cases here. But look, we're a platform where you can deploy this type of infrastructure globally. We have hundreds, literally thousands of network service providers and cloud providers that sit inside of Equinix. What you get with HPE is the ability to kind of do this in a private cloud environment with all their expertise. And so, this is a very high level diagram. Would be glad to kind of do a deeper dive with any company that's interested in kind of understand how this works afterwards.
If I tie to that, I know Malcolm, we talk about this a lot. And look, where can you deploy this? guys, this is not all of them. This is just what we could put on a slide that allows customers to quickly see that choice. How do we become relevant? So HPE partners with Equinix, and you can see why we partner with Equinix. They're everywhere. It facilitates our ability to run a private cloud ecosystem and connectivity to any hyperscaler that you desire.
That there was the question about how do we differentiate versus the competition. You can't go to another data center competitor and deploy HPE in all these global locations like you can in Equinix. Those lines connecting those cities is Equinix Fabric, a software-defined network that allows you to get connectivity to your infrastructure, to partner infrastructure, or to cloud providers in a matter of just minutes with an API that you pay for on a per day usage basis that you can burst up and burst down as needed. And this becomes very critical because most of these companies that were on today's call are not just single nation entities, they're multinational entities that need connectivity location in all parts of the world. And so being able to run GreenLake in all these locations makes a huge difference versus the competition.
Carrying forward the conversation, guys, a couple of use cases around HPC, again, it's as a service. So whether it be the compute workload, the orchestration software needed for it, if you're thinking about, whether it be Slurm, Moab, Bright, doesn't matter. Understanding the compute aspect of it, again, whether it be liquid cooled, direct liquid cooled, immersed, that we have immersion technology, we can solve a lot of it now, if you look at what we're doing there, you also have to look at what we're doing with storage. Self-defined, sure, but this is HPC. In the world of HPC, we need parallelism, parallel file. We have 6 different parallel file systems. In the parallel file systems depend on what you need out of it. Do you want data management in it? How do we actually facilitate this? And then how can we augment, enhance, or replace? In any one of these decisions, actually, it just looks at what do we have and how do we actually accelerate the outcome? And then more importantly, how is the ISVs maturing? Because in this world of HPC, what's really a big change right now is the ISVs that run in this estate. And again, Equinix facilitates us being able to stand up in a as a service models of HPC, so this be flexible, agile, and be able to support every one of our interconnects for an HPC estate. And of course, wrapping it with GreenLake, we can do a t-shirt size. We can understand how you actually can grow it and how we can meter it. We can meter the actual consumption of it. So you only pay for what you use. Machine learning. Machine learning is a fast evolving estate. Understanding the challenges around Kubernetes and the containerization of the estate. We support many different control planes. What you see here, Esmeralda is just one of our control planes. We support 6 different control planes in a Kubernetes environment. We facilitate that with the actual AKA of the, well, if you look at what we're doing with the actual control plane, then you have to look at the unified data platform, what's called the unified data fabric. Unified data fabric facilitates a northbound API, rich, robust for various components of S3 and HDFS, JSON, parallel POSIX. Take that, use data management around policy-driven ecosystems of hierarchical storage and copy data management. Now, run on something. It all has to be run on something, and it all has to, it has network components. And then, of course, we have to be able to stand it up and be able to scale it to the hyperscalers and back, meaning what if you have a particular aspect of your machine learning work job and that workflow facilitates a hyperscaler and back. Again, our ecosystem facilitates the data, providing asset or access to that data no matter where the compute is. So we can actually facilitate the actual data residency in our private cloud, and of course in the hyperscaler. So that's, again, how does it scale? If you're having a challenge right now with massive scale analytics, reach out to us. We can show you various ways of how we solve for it. And then, if you think about what we're doing right now with the workplace transformation, especially when it comes to VDI. We actually have many ways of solving for a VDI, but VDI, when it comes to traders and power users, require accelerated visualization. So how do we solve for that? And we work with NVIDIA and Equinix to stand up an ecosystem facilitating that experience. So it's really around driving that value of that VDI experience, showing that we can do a hosted desktop or a virtualized desktop. And the world is shifting to virtualization due to modernization of ISVs, the ISV being, VMware, Citrix, and what we're able to do with Citrix and others. And you see them over here like NVIDIA. You see what the VMware is doing with Horizon. And it's understanding how we're taking these new modern desktops and we're able to do 6 and 8 desktops or 8 screens per user, and showing them how we can virtualize that in a VDI world. So again, if you have questions around this, please reach out and ask. So that really takes me to where I wanted to get to, down to the real world. Let's get down a little bit tangible. So we showed all this right here, but so I'm going to turn it over to Malcolm right quick. Malcolm, talk to us about this slide here and what we're doing.
Yeah. So in the last 4 minutes, I'll cover what's left here. And we have a follow-up session next where we're going into roundtable where I can go much deeper. But the point is we offer a lot of different offerings under our GreenLake cloud service portfolio, not just VDI or AI ML ops as a service or private cloud VMware as a service. But we can do Nutanix, we can do Red Hat OpenShift, we can do all kinds of software-defined storage like Veeam, Cumulo, Cohesity, Commvault, Zerto, Weka. In just, even we've done some huge like Splunk and scalability solutions. So we even have a nonstop offering. So many of the financial institutions around the world run on HPE Nonstop. That is a very unique platform. It's called Nonstop because it's never meant to stop. We can offer nonstop or even mainframes under our GreenLake service. So it's very flexible. And now what's great is it includes where the data needs to reside, the data center. So we start with the conversation around where does your data need to reside globally for these workloads? And then we're going to help partner with based on connectivity and governance and latency. And then we can help design the colo space, the cabinets, the PDUs, the full network fabric, the fiber fabric, the routing, the switching, as well as all the compute and storage powering these workloads. The entire thing is as a service with an SLA wrapped around it where we can run it and monitor and manage and upgrade it for you under a single contract. Next slide. And so, we've been doing GreenLake, first of all, for over 12 years, and we have over 1,000 customers. And so often when we transition a customer from their legacy environment to a net new environment, we will go and, first of all, do an analysis at no cost to the customer on what the future state's going to look like under GreenLake to the right. And then we can actually purchase any legacy infrastructure a customer may have, and then we properly dispose of it, of course, for sustainability reasons and so on, security. And then we can gradually move you to a GreenLake offering over time. We know this is not just something you do, at the flip of a switch, but we help map out that digital transformation journey for you. And we do that up front at no cost. We sit with you and your team, and then we discuss, at what level of the service do we stop and you take over? And then what are the components of the project? Next slide. And so the examples that we have, this past year, for example, Woolworth, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, grocery retailer in Australia, they have a mission critical payment system powered by Nonstop. But it's not just the Nonstop platform, it's the private cloud, it's the backup, disaster recovery. It's always a bunch of other components. Third-party hardware, third-party software, and partnering with Equinix, we were able to transform them to a full as-a-service experience. So it includes the Equinix data center services, it includes the connectivity services, it includes all the HPE infrastructure and software, including third-party, all as a service so that they can continue to get groceries to their customers. And next slide. And then one other in the last 30 seconds is Barclays announced last month that they were going to select GreenLake for their private cloud platform. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of workloads that Barclays is going to shift to an as-a-service model. And so to summarize, again, this is not something we just started doing. We have over 1,200 customers around the world. We've been doing it for 12 years. We have over $5 billion of HPE infrastructure out on the street running as a service, meaning we own the infrastructure. It can run in your data center, but ideally in an Equinix facility that has better power efficiency, better cloud connectivity, lower latency, lower egress costs. And we've got customers that once they start doing it, I think we have a 90% retention rate. So customers typically, once they start under a consumption model, which is where they're kind of being forced to go, they like this one because it's a private, it's a dedicated environment. You're not running in a shared environment. So lots of benefits there. I think I'm out of time until our panel time. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was very informative.